Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my meta-analysis for the June 2020 format. Maybe a little bit late in the month, but we really don't have much going on to change the format up, aside from small tournaments here and there, but not really many products are coming out until towards the end of July. So this is what you can kind of expect moving forward for the next few weeks if you plan on entering any big tournaments. And of course, I want to show you all the deck lists and all the changes in some of the top high-level strategies so you guys are up to date and know what you are facing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So LCS4 was this past weekend. This has one of the highest densities of top players competing in an online environment. This tournament had about 180 players, which is a pretty respectable number for the online space. So here is the top breakdown from that tournament. You can see here that there was 5 Adamancipator, 4 Eldlich. There was actually 4 different Rocket variants or Dragon Link variants. There was 2 non-FTK variants and 2 FTK variants. We'll definitely be talking about that. We also have 1 Altergeist, 1 Dinosaur, and 1 Salamangreat, making up this overall top 16 breakdown. This is kind of what we've come to expect of this format. We definitely know that Adamancipator and Eldlich were just dominating all before this, but now we have a new contender to deal with, and that's what's going to take up a bulk of this video, being Dragon Link FTK. And guess what? That deck managed to take first place, not really surprising, piloted by Tristan Pugh. Now, I did have an interview with both Tristan and Gabriel Nets, 2 of the people who helped build and play this deck at LCS4. You can check out that video up in the top right corner or down in the description, but they're going to give you a more in-depth description on how the deck functions, as well as some of the inner intricacies of the deck building overall. But you can see right here, when you are looking at this 60 card list, I mean, this is just a monster, right? There is just so much going on here. I mean, this is a Dragon Link deck. We know this deck from the past. This deck has been actually very decent leading up till kind of like at the point where Secret Slayers was released and Adamancipator kind of took over as the premier combo deck of choice. But now that we have an FTK that spawns from a single card, well, I guess it's like a 2-card combo because you have to have any random discard, but there's so many 1-card ways to access this FTK, and even if it gets stopped, you have a multitude of extenders to be able to pull off the FTK. That is what makes this deck so terrifying. One card that helps make this deck a success is the brand new Chaos Space released in Toon Chaos. This is essentially 3 more copies of a card that allows you to search for any of your 1-card FTK enablers. And the thing is, even if this deck doesn't FTK, even if it does get stopped, you've got decent contingency plans. Like, at the very least, you can still end on a pretty terrifying board and have like Dragon Buster Destruction Sword just as a backup plan, locking your opponent out of the extra deck. So even if you don't FTK, you're still basically FTKing them, because most decks can't really play if they don't have their extra deck, especially when you look at what decks are at the top tiers of competitive play. Now, as to why the deck is 60 cards instead of 40, because it may be a little bit counterintuitive to think you want to FTK with this deck, but why would you want to play more than 40 cards and inherently make your deck more inconsistent? Well, the reason behind this is because since you have so many starters and extenders to perform the FTK, the deck itself has a pretty high number of cards it has to play. If you're playing a Dragon Link deck in particular, it goes through a lot of this deck just to be able to resolve this effect, but there's a significant number of cards you don't want to see in that opening hand, which are bricks, and so by upping the number of cards in the deck, you're reducing the likelihood that you're going to see those bricks in the opening hand. So because the ratio of starters and extenders doesn't really change the math or the probability of opening one of those cards, whether you're playing 40 or 60, because you can just play more of them since there's so many, and since you're reducing the chances of seeing those bricks in your opening hand, it actually makes sense to play 60 cards for the purposes of this deck. The same logic applies to the hand traps, because you want to make sure you see hand traps whether it's against a mirror match, Adamancipator, or Synchro Eldlich. But again, as long as you just play an uptick of those hand traps to make sure that the math still plays out, that you're going to see like at least 1 in your opening hand, maybe 2 post side, then you're going to be sitting pretty solid and you're going to have everything you need to either perform the FTK or defend yourself whenever your opponent may be throwing at you. Now, coming in second place, it should be no surprise that we have Adamancipator. This deck has just been terrorizing the format ever since the release of Secret Slayers, and it's really no surprise to see it doing well once again. I wanted to showcase this deck just to show some of the unique card changes as we've been evolving in the meta. We see the main deck Gate Blocker, which is again kind of a check against some of the top decks of the format. We also see main deck Gamma. Typically typically with these combo decks, we don't really see many hand traps, and Gamma being one of the most powerful because it negates the effect and destroys the monster, removing that monster from the field. Maybe a call for the mirror match specifically, because you don't really want to leave them with a rock. One thing to note though is that if the FTK does become more prevalent, which I'm really thinking it's going to, decks like Adamancipator are really going to have to consider respecting it and maining cards potentially to stop it, because it's not like going up against Adamancipator where they can build a board, and even though they technically like win the game, there's still ways to play through it depending on what deck that you're playing. When you're going up against an FTK, you don't have that opportunity to do so, and so it's going to be very crucial for these types of decks in particular to have some sort of check and balance for game one, so that way they just don't immediately lose the game. You could just make the argument as well, I guess, that, oh, if I lose the die roll, I'll just worry about it games 2 and 3. I guess, but when there's an FTK in the format, typically decks have to adapt around that, and so I'm curious to see how Adamancipator is going to fare moving forward. And then coming into top 4, of course, we have Synchro Eldlich, the other tier 1 threat of the format, with triple main deck token collector, mind you. I think this is a pretty good call with all these decks that are running around playing stuff like Link Cross and O-Lion and all these token producing cards. This is just a way to easily blow them out, and then you can just counter with your own combo on your turn. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. This is a card that a lot of people initially thought was a bit of a gimmick, but when there are this many token producing cards in the metagame, this is actually a pretty decent call, and so I really don't blame him for main decking it, and he got top 4, so obviously he's seen some success with it. The other top 4 deck though was actually Altergeist. Now this is exciting. We saw Multifaker went to 3 on the most recent June Forbidden and Limited list, and so Altergeist landing a top 4 for its first tournament with the new list in effect is pretty decent. We see here that this is a fairly standard Altergeist list. I mean, the hand trap lineup is a little bit tailored towards the meta. I think the most interesting things here is the fact that we have triple Torrential Tribute, as a matter of fact. This is a card that can really just blow out a lot of players. It's a card that is definitely up for debate because there are some ways that cards have immunity to destruction, so at times it can be difficult to argue if that is the correct card, but clearly Jack Verma, I mean, he's seen success with Altergeist in the past in Europe, so it's really no surprise that he knows what he's doing, and Torrential is still a big blowout card if your opponent isn't prepared to play around it. So congrats to him, it's really cool to see, and for any of you Altergeist players out there, this might be the list that you want to take onto Dueling Book or to YGO Pro and test out for yourself. Now coming in at top 8, we have the Dragon Link legend himself, Xuanping Zhu, piloting the non-FTK version of the Dragon Link strategy. It's still 60 cards. This deck is aiming to end on True King of all Calamities, which is basically a win condition in itself if you're able to get there, and it has a lot of really interesting text. We see cards like Chamber Dragon Maid being played, which can then search a spell card, which then allows you to effectively have like a 1-card Dragoonity Knight Romulus, which is kind of the starting point for a lot of the combos that the Dragon Link strategy incorporates. And again, you're not playing the FTK, and Xuanping Zhu specifically said he didn't want to play the FTK because you could still essentially FTK by summoning True King of all Calamities and not make your deck nearly as fragile or inconsistent if your opponents are prepared or have numerous hand traps to be able to stop you. So that was his call. He made top 8, so clearly he did still make the right choice. He actually ended up losing to Tristan, who ended up taking first place, so it really came down to whoever's going to win that match could have ultimately just won the tournament. But again, there was 4 of these types of decks in the top 16, and moving forward, I definitely think we're going to be seeing more of this deck. So if you aren't already familiar with what this deck can do, now is the time to definitely educate yourself. Then wrapping up the video, I have a few of the top 16 deck profiles I wanted to discuss. One of them is an Adamancipator list, but what's interesting is that it is a Sekka's Light Adamancipator list. Sekka's Light is only at 1 copy, mind you, but this is a really interesting take on the deck. Maybe we'll see more of this moving forward, because if these Adamancipator decks need to play more hand traps, this could be a way for them to incorporate that and still be able to get a card as powerful as Sekka's Light into their deck. Who knows? We'll just have to see, but it was cool to see a deck like this make it to top 16, so just keep in mind that there could be a Sekka's Light version of this deck coming around in the near future. We also had a top 16 Dinosaur list. This deck was playing a huge amount of hand traps, but again, Dinosaur is one of the few decks that can actually go toe-to-toe with some of the top tier contenders. simply because of the fact that Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is so powerful. You also still have plays and being able to go to like Lagia, Dolka, different things like that. It's a very good tier 2 deck. It's able to, like I said, go toe to toe, and so it's something that you're still going to see a moderate amount of, but it's still not going to pale in comparison to all of the top tier contenders like Eldlich, Adamancipator, as well as this new Dragon Link deck that we're definitely going to be seeing more of. And lastly, I wanted to end on Salamangreat. Good old Salamangreat, kind of there in that tier 2 category as well. One of the interesting things about this particular Salamangreat list is the fact that he was playing multiple copies of Gravedigger's Trap Hole in tandem with Trap Trick's Rafflesia. The logic here is that if you're able to go into something like, let's say, Parallel Exceed and get 2 level 4s onto the board, you can go into a Rafflesia, and this is effectively a pseudo Called by the Grave because you can just use it to effectively negate any of your opponent's hand traps and be able to combo completely unhindered. And that's really good for Salamangreat because with an inherent weakness to a card like Nibiru, which a lot of decks are playing to put the combo decks in check, this is a really cool way to kind of play around that and give the deck a little bit more defense in that regard. It's a deck that can pretty much cover all of its bases. It can actually destroy any of the other like tier 2 and below decks for sure because it just has the tools to really deal with anything. This deck can play a lot of hand traps as well, which is good when you're going up against these heavy combo decks, stabilize the board, and kind of just take control of the game from there, and definitely being able to play cards like Access Code Talker give this deck a desperately needed win condition to close out games even more quickly than it could before. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.